All right, I want to welcome you to this edition of RAP, On the Road. This is Revolutionary African Perspectives, and we're at home this weekend. We're in Kenya. As you know, we say our program is from Atlanta to Accra, but this time we're in Nairobi, Kenya, and we have the great opportunity to interview Booker Omole, he's the National Organizing Secretary for the Social Democratic Party of Kenya. And tell us a little bit about your party and how it came about.
Thank you, Comrade Sobukwe, and it's my pleasure to be interviewed by RAP today. I will give you a brief history of our party, but a little clarification is that when we talk of Social Democratic Party, I wanted to clarify to our listeners that it is a Marxist-Leninist party, and also it's also a Pan-Africanist organization. But the name SDP, it's only there for strategic purposes because some of us participate in what we call the bourgeois elections. So our party generally was incorporated in Kenya in 1992, and we had a presidential candidate at that time, which was Charity Kalukingilu, a lady for that matter. Mm-hmm. And then we have gone what we call internal party struggles from mere social democracy as we've been moving towards the left, and it's only 2 years ago that we were able to now register it at the Registrar of Political Parties as a Marxist-Leninist party. We have a central committee that is chaired by Comrade Mwandawiro Mganga, and of course Benedict Weshira is our national organizing our Secretary General, and I am the national organizing secretary of the party.
Okay. So now that would make your organization a lot different from the Social Democratic Party that we may see in the United States, like the party in which Bernie Sanders emerges from, right?
Sure. We are on all our position in geopolitics. We are anti-imperialist by all its aspects. We also have a strategic position on certain geopolitical equations that make us a revolutionary party. For example, we are very clear about the freedom of the Sahrawi people, which is still under the occupation of the Morocco. We are very clear about the Palestinian equation. We are very clear about the North Korean situation. We are very clear about issues that touch on occupation and colonialism. Yes.
All right, so yeah, certainly that would be a lot different. We had a hard time in the United States having if none of the candidates on any party, except those, of course, who have left that don't get into the news, talked about the question of Palestine. But you're, as you say, clear on this question, and you support the Palestinians' right for self-determination in their own land.
Definitely, yes. Of course, we know the question of the occupiers. We have that history in Africa, here in the continent of stealing of land, and we know we have a history of resistance, and all we can normally wish our Palestinian comrades and brothers and sisters there that they need to continue with the fight to win back their land, to win up to bring back the freedom, and they have all the right to self-determination. Yes, I agree.
Okay. Yeah. I think we're going to come back to the question of settler colonialism even here in Kenya. But I know what's on a lot of people's mind and what's probably in the popular news and internationally about what's going on in Kenya is because of course I came on August 29th here to Kenya, and I thought, of course, that the elections were over and there was that Uhuru had won one more time, and we were moving forward from there. But I came here to find that were petitions and filed with the court, and there were appeals about the irregularities of voting patterns in the country. And now there's been a recall of the election, at least at the presidential level so far, a ruling that is making the presidential election null and void. Now I know this is something that we don't hear about from the Penn standpoint of view from either. Of course, we're hearing a lot about it from the standpoint of both parties that are in contention, but from us, we wanted to get somebody who was outside of the fray to give us an analysis of how we get to the major two parties that have been contending for at least the last 3 or 4 elections, how we got to that point, and what is the significance of this election having to do a rerun.
Thank you very much, Sobukwe. But I think to answer your question, probably I could give you put it in some historical context, especially where Kenya has come from, and of course, you know, for the little time you've spent here, that it's a bourgeois democracy. That even among the bourgeois democracies that we have, Kenya is looked at as one of the progressive bourgeois democracy. But it has been a fight and a struggle in Kenya to bring up the multi-party system, which is basically what we see globally, or what they call Western democracy. And we will say that in Kenya today, at least we have that space, that democratic space, even to register our party officially and stop operating covertly and come back to do some overt work. That democratic space has literally been fought for. But to come to Kenyan situation, really we have been dominated by 2 main political outfits. Just like in the United States, you have the Republicans, and they tend to pretend to be antagonistic to one another. One wants to say we are progressive, the others no, we are more progressive than the other. But their antagonistic is only in form, but not in content.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. So we're saying that, in essence, that the parties support some of the same things on a global level. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, our party supports some of the things at the global level, but in back here at home, we are the 2 main political actors, which one is called Jubilee and one is now a broader coalition called NASA. We share certain issues, but not generally. Just like in revolutionary politics, it's built on alliances. So there are certain times that we are talking about the same thing, but more often than not, we are really on the opposite side. But the current situation is just the same as the United States situation. What I would say, 2 political outfits masquerading as being antagonistic, and one trying to outdo the other only in form but not in content, because both the political outfits actually they worship bourgeois democracy, and they do not. If you look at the way one comes out as pro-reforms, but when they're in government, or the way they do their campaigns, they will want to propel themselves to power through either corruption, basically, and come out to be more pro-reform agenda than the other. But either way, if you reveal them in terms of their content and what they do, then they're really supporters of imperialism. They support bourgeois democracy. They have different positions, especially on land issues. They both support privatization. They both support, they have no position towards voter bribery because most of them do it. They ethnicize the current politics to try and dilute the class contradictions. They try to put in more money to buy loyalty from various tribes. So, in actual sense, that's what they know how to do. Now, when we went to the election on the 8th of August, most of the smaller parties had already been acted out, because there were a lot of hostility towards the small progressive parties, and ideally before that, even the small party, including our party, used to get a portion from government funding to do our activities here. But come last year, the two political parties actually, they conspired that they wanted a democracy, what they were calling United States style, or the British style, where we only have a few main political parties that dominate the debate, and the others are. So they actually conspired to kill progressive parties, but our party has since still managed to survive, and even we deliberately participate in the national elections. Of course, the winner and the nullification of elections. One thing that you have to know that in Kenya, it's always politics. There is nowhere you will come and find nobody's politicking about one thing or the other. There are movements coming by. What it basically means that there are so many issues that needs to be addressed. Like there is normally land issue. We have politics about the land issue. We have politics around the workers. The debate about how to win more benefits for the working people. So normally you expect a little bit more debates. After that, of course, there was a ruling at the Supreme Court, which was a landmark, I would say, because it has never happened in the region of a Supreme Court sitting to nullify a presidential election, and then the president also, instead of going against it, accepting it. But what it can be interpreted really is, do these political players, are they accepting them out of their own accord, or they're getting pressures from somewhere? Definitely.
When you say pressures from somewhere, are we talking about foreign pressures of economic interest outside of the country?
Yes, when I talk of pressures, for example, we have had a lot of interest in the Kenyan election, the international community, the European Union, the United States, and they're saying we are not interested in any war in Kenya. Our interest, we want calm, we want peace, we want to be able to operate in Kenya like we've always been. It is the headquarters of the United Nations. So definitely, it is not just contributed to the internal democratic processes as they want to look at it, but there's a lot of also foreign influence in terms of their behavior, because we know one of the biggest monies that come to finance election here in this country is not local money. It's majorly money that come in through either civil societies or...
when we talk about civil societies, these are organizations that are often referred to in the West as non-profit organizations, and organizations that get many times, sometimes they are local, but many times the money comes from outside.
Yes, the non-governmental organization, and the money either comes from the USA or the UK aid, and they are coming in not to finance anybody's interest, but of course the foreign interest here. Yeah.
And I think this kind of lends us to talking about the question of neoliberal politics and what that means. And you know, that's a term, of course. Neoliberal politics often is associated with the question of being able to, the outside, foreign, anybody being able to privatize things that are often not privatized in most nations, like even being able to privatize, I know you gave me the example of something like water, or being able to privatize something like the military supplies or weapons and that kind of things, or taking over power grids or power companies and that kind of things that are for the greater good or social uplift of the people, that are common things. Even education and things like that are sometimes on the chopping block.
Yes, you're right. Kenya is heavily dominated by international capital. What they want to control it firmly. They want to. Even our economy is not inward looking. It is always more often dependent on external forces. And it started off really by the implementation of, the forced implementation of the structural adjustment program that was forced upon us by the World Bank. And this led to, of course, privatization of most of the public institutions, most of what we call the parastatals, government banks were privatized, people lost job, and so much pain into the ordinary and the working people. But the effects of neoliberal policies have been felt in the recent times, especially in issues of, let us say, for example, land. Now, as we sit, we have more private land in Kenya than public land, and this land has been alienated from the people, and it is only used by a few political elite, or rather foreign companies, or hunting grounds of other foreign companies for their own personal benefits. And even if you look at the way our production is, we have big multinationals here. You probably have heard of, we are talking about the Kenyan tea, which is big. We're talking about Kenyan coffee, that is big. But if you talk of Kenyan tea or coffee, these are sectors that are dominated by big international companies like Finlay's, and what they do here is produce the raw material, but even the exact processing of Kenyan tea doesn't really happen here. We have probably 1 million acres of land under tea, but not any of that tea is processed here locally. What it basically means that they are only using Kenya as a ground for cheap labor and to take up the raw materials and then do the processing elsewhere. Another sector is in mining, for example. We have a lot of minerals in Kenya. A good example is titanium, where we have an Australian firm, Titanium-Based Resources, and they are taking it all by themselves. Nobody knows the amount of titanium in the soil that they are taking. But every week we have a ship carrying a lot of soil taken to Australia. So our question is, how much of that soil has titanium? And are they paying, to what interest will they be carrying soil from Africa? Definitely there is much more on it. And of course in the international news you see a lot of confrontation between the big landowners, basically in central Kenya, in Laikipia, and the locals, because you'll find we have seven big ranches, but the locals who are having cows and their animals, they cannot access it because it is fenced with electrical, and inside it they just put some wild animals to attract, to attract tourists, which are basically from their country. So you normally see, at least once in a month, you see one white guy killed in Laikipia, a ranch owner killed probably in Nanyuki, because of those internal conflicts that are more related to land.
So just to be clear, we're talking about that many of the small cattle workers, people who own small amounts of cattle, are having more and more trouble in terms of accessing some of the resources that the cattle need to graze, to water, to do the things that they need to do because of the much larger entities, the large acres of land that are being used for safari, for all other kinds of things that are cut off from that cuts the other farmers, the regular everyday small farmer, off from being able to enjoy the same access.
Yeah, definitely. What it basically means is that you send people away from their land, and then you privatize that land, and sometimes it is given out by the government for free for these so-called investors. And they will say, when we have investors, then we have good foreign, our foreign currency keeps coming in, and we need more investors in our country, and in return, we give them land for free. And you find out that you have small cattle owners that are only relying with 2-3 cows, and they do not have any land to graze on because most of the land has been given to one single individual for either commercial tea farming or just to have it as a ranch and where people could come and visit.
And I don't want to miss your point about the question of the conflict and the struggle, because in the 60s and the 70s, particularly in the 60s when it comes to Kenya, we would definitely had our eyes on the fact that this was one of the areas in which there was armed struggle, and a popular armed struggle. We know people like Malcolm X, El-Haj Malik Shabazz would tell us about, and to tell us about what was framed by the British as the Mau Mau revolts and the Mau Mau revolution or national liberation struggle. So we had this struggle and promise that it seemed like land was at the center of this struggle, much like, of course, land being at the center of settler occupied territories like Southern Africa. And I guess our thoughts was that when we had these victories, when these armed struggles were being successful in Kenya at that time, and much later in South Africa, that we were going to be in control of the land, and that the land would be in the hands of the masses of the people.
Ideally not. In fact, in all our forums here we say the revolution was never complete because it was hijacked by really the collaborators that were collaborating with the British system during the colonial era, call it the Home Guards. But what the British called the Mau Mau was actually the Land Defense Force, which was under the leadership of Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, who is also one of our freedom fighters here. But just to put it in a historical context, when the British forces were beaten in Kenya, it found out that most of the progressive nationalists were actually arrested. So the people who really negotiated what they're calling a negotiated agreement for the independence were mostly collaborators. And of course, Dedan Kimathi, who was the leader of our freedom movement at that time, had already been killed by the British, and Jomo Kenyatta was in incarcerations in Maralal, and we had Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who had been in house arrest somewhere in Nyanza. So when the real deal for freedom for independence was being debated, we only managed to change, the white people that were colonizing us by the black oppressors, and that's how majority of the Kenyan land are still owned by few individuals. And it's really the effects of neo-colonialism. We changed the white man and had a black man now controlling the means of production, controlling the land, controlling the neo-colonial, the colonial. We inherited the colonial economic system. We wanted to export more, and we did not want to concentrate on really manufacturing things for our own use. So you'll find the independent government was still more focused on exporting more tea, more coffee, instead of clothing the population, producing food. And then it came in with what they used to call the grants. The big grants started coming in to Kenya, basically from the United States government. They were sending a lot of grants to help build the country, but also trying to, when the grant come in, then the policy also come in. So it's like a carrot and a stick. You have to do this. If we give you, for example, money, you must you must talk of free enterprising, you must open up your market, you must stop any controls on the education sector, you must leave your health care for business. So such situations is how we found ourselves now, really having a colonial economic system, a colonial government, but now the prefects of the same, of course, are black people. And the comprado bourgeoisie is really here, and they are also trying to fight for their own space. And of course, they are relying on their international partners to make sure that they continue to oppress and exploit the people more, not just for themselves, but on behalf of also the foreign government. Particularly here is British and multinational companies. Yeah.
So, in that context, and I, in this context of this notion of land, and I already made one comparison between certainly, and many people don't really, I guess, are not as familiar with the Kenyan situation in settler colonialism as they are in the situation in Southern Africa. Because it's also true, unlike what happened in the land reform actions that took place in Zimbabwe, that it never took place in any of the other southern region in terms where there was large swaths of land given back to the people. And so, in that context, I know in Southern Africa there is there is violence that is unreported. People in the who are doing some of the things that you talked about, fighting for land or having to or actually intimidating some of these large landowners who've been pimping the government, for a better term, lack of a better term, or getting free things from the government or cheap things from the government and having a big advantage over the other people locally. Now, tell us in the context, what kind of organizational work? Because I know, again, we have these, small uprisings or these spontaneous, I won't call them spontaneous, but, a reaction to the conditions, people rise up and fight against unfair treatment or try to get some of the space and land that has been historically theirs. What kind of organizational or land movement is here in Kenya that we can really put our finger on or really identify as one that's organized and moving forward?
Comrade, I would say there are very strong movement of the landless in Kenya, especially in the coastal area, in central Kenya, in western Kenya, where most of the land that belonged to the people were grabbed by a few individuals. But these confrontations that happen, just like any other government would behave, when it becomes a real threat to the state, then they start they form a commission, for example, to try and look into the land equation and propose certain measures to have an equal distribution of land, but they never get to implement them. And also they come up with minimal land reforms just to make sure that the noise subsides a bit. And if you look at, we have two commissions that have been appointed in the last 10 years. We have Ndumu Land Report in Kenya. We also have Truth, Justice and Commission report, and all of them has a recommendation on how to deal with the historical injustices of land, and they are seated somewhere just collecting dust. Nobody is willing to implement them until again there is another movement in regard to land. So, for example, we have Taita Taveta Landless Organization. We have the Nyandarua Land Movement, and all of them we try to, even if most of them are not our party members, but we get engaged in their work and try to organize them in a certain way and tell them that all this promise that they will be given land is just a way to delay the process, but in actual sense, the government of the day is not interested of making sure that the squatters are settled, that the entire land, like if you go in the coastal region, you will find the current president owns 100,000 hectares of land, and in the neighborhood there is Basil Criticals, who is a Greek, owning another 100,000, and people are pushed to live on the leeward side. So if there is a lot of violent demonstration, then they will go there and address the people and take part of the population as collaborators and give them small pieces of land to build some shanties around it. But also, it is not a particularly new thing for any government of the day to do that, because even our founding father, Jomo Kenyatta, used to have, when they have grabbed a lot of piece of land, then they bring in few friendlier people which are members of their tribe to give also land around it. And why they do that is to put a buffer zone of their tribes people that are, you don't have land in central, we have a few land in coast. And they will use that to also access almost cheap labor, almost free for them to come and work for them in the farm, to offer labor and be paid really some almost nothing.
Is it also a way to use ethnic tensions to create a condition where people are not coming together and fighting collectively in these issues?
Yes, primarily the tribal divisions were used it's the same way the colonial masters used them. It's the same. That's the same way they're using it now. For example, during the colonial period, we know that most of the land from the Kikuyus, which is basically from central, and they come from the highlands, and it is fertile land, were taken from them. So the real fight started in the central Kenya, coming to the rest of the country. And then the colonizers decided to bring up preaching the tribal tensions. And they say the Maasais are the most, they came up with these stereotypes, the most accommodating tribe is this, the most wholesale tribe is this, and even they will use the tribal thing to bring people into the public service to work for government. If you come from a particular tribe, then you're not allowed to work for the government because your people are fighting the colonizers for land. So it's the same way today, even in terms of politics. We have a few tribal leaders that have, are calling themselves kingpins of either the Luo nation or the Kalenjin nation or the Kikuyu nation. And basically they are telling the poor and the landless that this time around is the time for this tribe to be in government. And we are collaborating with the other tribe and the other tribe. And if you go to the coast, for example, in Peketoni, when the president goes there, he will be appealing to the majority of the Kikuyu tribe there and telling people, you know, if they kick me out of here, out of my land, then also you people be prepared that the next time they will be demanding that you go back to your native place. So the tribal tensions in Kenya are actually a tool for the leadership elite to cause divisions, and that enables them to continue to exploit and oppress the bigger masses.
Okay.
So yes, it is something that has been used more frequently than not.
Of course, I'm sure that's part of your party's agenda to make sure that Kenyans think of that we find a way around or find a way through the ethnic divisions that are being more imposed by, or I should say, manipulated, as opposed to natural.
Yes, as a party, we are very clear that what they are calling tribal contradictions are very tertiary, because even within those temporary marriages or temporary unity in tribes, there is still a lot of fights within them, because a landless Kalenjin and a propertied Kalenjin, they are still just real enemies. They, after the vote, then the real fight starts. Like even now, we have demonstrations in Mau forest, and all they're looking for, the tribal thing goes down, and then it's augmented during the election time to influence it. But what primarily remains the same as a contradiction is the class contradictions in our society, and that's the party's position that until we organize the communities around certain struggles that affect them, whether they're the poor of the poorest, or the workers, or the peasants, to know that the main true liberation will come when the entire system, this colonial system that we inherited, is demolished, and we replace it not just by any other system, but a humane system, a socialist system, based on solidarity, friendship, and true cause to the people's liberation. Then nothing will change. It will just be, a continuous struggle. So yes, we give the class position every time we analyze the Kenyan situation. Even now, we did issue a statement about the political condition in Kenya, and we are saying that even if the revolutionary politics in Kenya or anywhere else in the world relies on alliances, but we cannot build alliances, for example, with the Jubilee as an outfit. And the reason why we cannot do that is at least within the NASA establishment, we have people that have historical, they have a history to fight for even some little reforms, to fight for the landless people, to fight for a minimum pay wage. But if you have the government that is pro-business, it's either we want peace, we want to do business, and they're lying to people, especially the poor people, that, hey, it's an equal opportunity for all, and every time they tell you, so-and-so came from the slum, and now he's a millionaire. So-and-so came and was from Kibera slum, and they had he was singing, Mm-hmm. So he's an artist, and he's been taken by now he's singing in Europe and is earning in dollars. You can also do it. So it's a fallacy that they're building around the
myth of the great individual.
Yes, so they're trying to convince you that Kenya is an equal opportunity for all, and the only reason why you're poor is that you're not working hard enough, because we have seen people get out of poverty quite easily. So such kind of tactics, as a political party, we try to bring the classic question and expose, even with our alliances, we still try to expose the hypocrisy of these two big organizations in Kenya, these big two political organizations in Kenya, basically pretending that one will bring change and trying to challenge each other, but in terms of any minimum or maximum program to change the life of the people in Kenya, they probably haven't figured it out, or they just do not want to do it. Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to ask you just one more question. Okay. That question is that I know the Social Democratic Party of Kenya, I know you said one of the anomalies of your ideology, your principles are Marxist-Leninism, but also you are also talk about the question of Pan-Africanism and your work with and concern with all of Africa as a party. Give us how that works for you, or how that looks for you, maybe even starting regionally, what it means to be a party that sees Pan-Africanism as one of the objectives.
Comrade, we should start from the point that from our party's perspective, a united and a liberated Africa is only possible under scientific socialism. That's where we start all our argument. And the second thing that we always clarify, that people will think that we will achieve the freedom of people of African descent living in the continent or out of the continent within the context of imperialism. That also is one of the myths that we try to demystify in all discussions. So, as a political party, a Pan-Africanist political party and a socialist party, our main contribution to all these engagements that we do within the Pan-Africanist framework is really to give a clear meaning or ideological clarity to our struggle towards a free, united Africa, and we try to demystify so many beliefs that surrounds it. Just the other day I was telling you that you will meet members of what we call Pan-African Movement Kenya, talking about going back to our roots as the only way to foster in the Pan-Africanism ideology. And they will want to celebrate certain Pan-Africanist individuals, like, for example, Kwame Nkrumah, but they want to be silent to say that Kwame Nkrumah was a socialist or a communist for that matter. They all want to...
And when you say they want to be silent, because we're talking to a U.S. audience,
Yeah.
you're saying basically they're silent on the aspects that Kwame Nkrumah was certainly believed in scientific socialism and communism.
Yes, they do not want that to come out, but they want to portray certain achievements of the individual. So the debate then becomes about Kwame Nkrumah, but not
about his ideology.
Not about his ideology. They want to talk about Mwalimu Julius Nyerere as an individual. They want to limit the discussion of, they want to debate more on personality issues than ideological issues. And our position has been that as socialists, really, we do not worship the people. But for example, we know Mandela fought for the freedom, but there are also, he was just a representation of many people in South Africa that lost their life during the fight against apartheid. But we cannot make them an achievement for an individual. For example, Amilcar Cabral, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Mandela, everybody wants to celebrate them in Kenya. But if you tell them, do you know any political ideology that these individuals ever, for example, in Guinea, what we normally call the land of the upright man, do you know any political ideology that made these nations either great or these people, either they were, but they don't want to, they know it is socialism, but it's somehow, the debate about socialism has been condemned, especially the big corporate media, the CNN, the BBC, have been talking about only failure of socialism. They are not talking about any progress of socialism. If they, for example, if you challenge somebody locally here about, what about Cuba? It's not a success story, but they want to talk about only the material achievements within the Cuban government, but they do not want to talk about the ideological project because they don't want us to associate any progress with socialism. Like yesterday, we were arguing about North Korea, and I told them, please go online and check about the education system of North Korea and the rate of literacy. And they said, you're lying. North Korea is a backward country with basically nothing to show for it, and 90% of the population cannot read and write. And when they went online and Googled, almost 99% literacy in North Korea, and they were like, wow. So all this thing we are consuming from the corporate media is all junk.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and certainly this is part of, I think, one of the things that maybe Kwame Ture said was one of the biggest weaknesses in our movement as a people, because we are willing to take action, but when it comes to the struggle of ideas, principles, and actually taking those on, that has been one of our weaknesses of the past, and we have to correct that if we're going to move forward.
I agree. In all we do, we do not want to either make people assume, for example, that there can be a revolution without a revolutionary theory, that we can have, it's like saying you want to be a doctor but you don't want to study medicine. So we always insist, it is theory feeds into practice, and practice feeds into theory. And don't tell me that one day people will think they have suffered too much, that they need to fight the people who make them suffer. If that was the situation, then we will be having revolution in the world every minute. So we try to demolish such myths in our debates, and we know that just like Fidel Castro said, we are in a battle of ideas for a better world. Yeah.
My brother, I want you to do one more thing for me. I want you to give, if people want to find more about your party, your political work, where can they go?
We have an online, we do publish a lot about our political activity. You can go to sdpkenya.org and you will find our activities, not just in Kenya, but you will find our activities in regard to our solidarity activities. Now, most importantly, of course, in North Korea, there are also activities and solidarity work in regards to the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, and of course our solidarity with our Cuban people and the Cuban Revolution and all the oppressed people and exploited people of the world. And we view ourselves as a citizen of the globe.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
All right. I want to thank you again. This is, again, Comrade Booker from the Social Democratic Party of Kenya. Again, that's going to be a wrap. All right. We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.